My name is Emery. I've never been one to shy away from romantic tales in which the male character utterly captivates the female lead. I was very happy when Lucas appeared with his lovely texts in the morning and his late-night calls inquiring about my day. I realized so quickly, almost laughably, that this was it. This is affection. My friends used to claim that we were destined to be together after taking one glance at each other. But then there was Grandma June, a wise woman who had lived through many seasons. "Watch the signals, Emery, honey," she would constantly say. "A man may not be merely in love if he demands all of your attention. It's possible he wants to control you." Nana's outdated views on men and their customs would make me laugh it off. Lucas was unique, or so I thought. There we were, reclining on my shabby couch on an evening that seemed like every other evening we'd spent together. When he inquired about my day, he squeezed my hand a little too tightly. "Met anyone interesting at work today?" he inquired. I would only tell him the highlights, omitting the less interesting details. "It's the same folks every day, you know that. And nobody fresh. Nobody showed any curiosity in you." Though his tone was casual, his grasp wasn't. "Why so curious?" In an attempt to lighten the situation, I gently withdrew my hand. "Just making sure we're good, that's all," he said, his eyes barely brightened by his smile. The TV was chatting away in the background as we drifted, breaking the stillness. I had felt this similar kind of little pressure numerous times before, but I had always been able to ignore it. My heart began to sink as Grandma June's comments started to creep back. That's a thin line, and I never really paid much attention to it. The evening stretched on. We sat there together, but my thoughts were far away, mired in the cautions of Grandma June and this knot in my gut that would not go away. Lucas stole some of my tranquility with him when he departed. After locking the door, I reclined and released the breath I had been holding. All alone myself in my flat, but for the murmurs of uncertainty that reverberated more loudly in the room he was leaving behind. I considered giving Grandma June a call, but it was becoming late, and I had to sort this mess out on my own. The microwave's digital clock began to flash in time with my discomfort, and that's when I understood there really is a narrow line between love and a cage. It was me who disregarded the warnings, mistaking them for flowers rather than the warning signs that they were. After saying, "I do," Lucas and I moved into my small house covered in ivy to begin our married life. However, as we got established things started to shift. We were sitting on our porch one evening when the aroma of the neighboring pine trees filled the air. "Who's that new guy working with you?" Lucas questioned, his voice cutting through the silence as his palm rested a little too firmly on mine. "That's simply David, I see. He works in the marketing division," I said in an attempt to appear impartial. He murmured, "Ma'am," and I saw the typical tightness in his jaw. That look, I recognized it as the same one he used to indicate that things wasn't quite right. Lucas's queries become more than just inquiries over time. They resembled probes, searching for something he appeared to be certain he would discover. He then began scrubbing my garments. I was choosing a dress for a brunch with friends on a Sunday morning. "That one's pretty," he added, gesturing to a garment with muted colors. I considered donning the blue one. "It's more upbeat," I proposed, gesturing to my best outfit, the one that gave me a little more sparkle in my eyes. He gave a head shake. "You would be too noticeable." It wasn't a suggestion. He urged, "Wear the other one." "But Lucas, it's just a dress," I responded, attempting to diffuse the situation. "Emery, just have faith in me. I'm keeping an eye on you," he added. However, it didn't feel like a gaze outside. It had the sensation of locking up. His tastes extended beyond my closet to our social interactions. Friendship dinners dwindled in frequency. My phone began to vibrate less, and soon enough, the invites completely stopped coming in. With a frown on his face, he collapsed into the couch next to me one evening. Mark gave me a call, wants to go out for drinks with us the following Saturday. Reaching for the remote, he added, told him we're busy. We are. Surprised, I asked. It'd been weeks since I last saw Laura and Mark. They were our couple friends, the people we frequently went on double dates with. Lucas turned the channels, avoiding eye contact. We don't have to see them all the time. I have you and you have me. Isn't that sufficient? The words caught in my throat as I hesitated. I knew I couldn't win the argument, but part of me was too fatigued to dispute with him and tell him that we were our own people. I repeated, that's enough, but it sounded like I was trying to persuade myself. This was my life now, a life Lucas thought he had the right to seize, a life where my speech and my clothes were my domain. And each time I released it, he would take a tiny bit more. I didn't know how much of who I was had been chipped away until I saw an old picture of me laughing with friends. I was losing chunks of myself. I wondered where the woman's grin had disappeared when I glanced at the photo. The problem about life is that it's a lot messier than you would think, particularly when love holds you down rather than releases you. Recently, our love has seemed like walls closing in on us, masked as simply another aspect of married life. That's how it's been with Lucas. His most recent vice, abruptly appearing at my office and acting as like he owned both the space and, in a sense, me. Just in the neighborhood, he would usually say, then flash an overly bright smile. I made the decision to go to work the following day, wearing my favorite pencil skirt one evening at home. Lucas entered the room with a tortured expression that made me tense up. His rage erupted over nothing as he growled, "Why do you need to wear that?" "Lucas, it's just a skirt," I remarked in a calm tone. "Not again, I wanted to fight." He rejected it. "It isn't just any old item. Who do you think you're clothing for?" His tone was a caustic remark, his suspicions open and shameless. "Lucas, I dress for myself." "Is that illegal as of late?" Even to my own ears, it seemed that I was reaching as I tried to justify my independence and my decision. When daylight came the next day, my skirt, the one I was going to wear, was gone. Not only that one item, but half of my clothes appeared to have simply disappeared. I felt a chilly wave of panic go over me, making me disoriented. With his back to me, Lucas was brewing coffee in the kitchen, just like any other day. "Where are my clothes, Lucas?" When I requested, my voice was tinged with fear and wrath. It was a mixture of feelings that made me seem more like a stranger than a wife. They were definitely not suitable. He spoke with an unnaturally calm tone, as if he were talking about the weather rather than my personal stuff. "I did us both a favor," he added. "Is it a favor? Is it possible to decide what I may and cannot wear? Are you in tune with your own thoughts?" My voice was filled with astonishment and dismay, and I was unable to conceal the fact that this was my reality. "Emery, it's for the best," she said. He responded by saying, "You'll thank me later," and the manner in which he said it, even though he seemed to know better, made my skin crawl. At the point where I was halfway through filling out the FLA form, the mask fell off, and Lucas's worry revealed its actual face: control. He was attempting to transform me into something that was smaller, more restricted, and less of a reflection of who I am. He was reducing my independence and my opportunities for choice. His remarks reverberated throughout the room as I sat at the kitchen table, and it dawned on me that my house, which had been a place of warmth and affection in the past, had transformed into something else. In spite of the fact that it was a beautifully furnished jail and the man I married was the warden, it was neither safe nor reassuring. The remainder of the day seemed to go by in a haze. Although I appeared to be a ghost at work, going through the motions and smiling when it was appropriate, a tempest was raging under the surface. I sat at my desk for a considerable amount of time, gazing at the images of my family that were stored on my phone, particularly the ones in which Lucas appeared to be the ideal spouse. At this point, it seemed as though they were scenes from the life of a separate lady. I sat in the car outside the home for a considerable amount of time that evening, the motor humming gently in the background. I wasn't sure I had the power to force myself through the door, but I did anyway. When I eventually turned the key and entered the building, the door made a creaking sound. It was then that I caught a whiff of the aroma of supper, and there was Lucas, all grins and kisses, acting as if today was like anything other. On the other hand, it was not, and the unfortunate part was that I was unsure whether or not tomorrow would be any different. During my time at work, my supervisor, Mr. Jacobs, placed a large file on my desk. "Emery, I have a new project for you to work on. You are the most qualified candidate for the position, but it is going to need some late nights." Despite the sinking sensation in my stomach, I managed to suppress a smile and said, "Mr. Jacobs, I am completely at liberty to enjoy myself." At dinner, I was the one who broke the news. The sound of Lucas's fork clattering across his plate caused his eyes to squeeze together into slits. "You'll quit," he said, his words having a clarity that was unmistakable. Last but not least, Lucas, giving up is not as simple as you make it seem. "I am good at what I do, and yes, we do need the money," I told him, hoping that he would finally come to his senses and that the conversation would become more rational. He was clearly angry, as shown by the fact that his fists were balled up on the table. "No wife of mine will slave away for some boss's whims," he nearly screamed out. "I have no intention of doing so." Evelyn, his mother, stood at our table like a ghost at that same moment. She was always on cue and always shivering with some type of fear. That was the moment. She began by saying, "Emery, honey," while her hands were darting around like frightened birds, "can't you just ease up a bit for Lucas?" Although it was not proper in any way, shape, or form, I had loved him in the past, and I suppose that a portion of me still clung to that love. As a result, I chose to take the middle ground. Is it possible to reach a compromise? I will be working from my house. You can have the best of both worlds, right? This caused the wrinkles on Lucas's face to become less noticeable as he slouched back. "Fine," he said, nearly to the point of pouting, "but no late nights." At the same time that her pale eyes found mine, Evelyn smiled, expressing her relief and a whispered thank you. However, for me, I experienced a sense of confinement, with the walls being painted by Lucas's rage and Evelyn's fear serving as a frame. My world became my home office as the days evolved into weeks and the weeks turned into months. The fact that Lucas would occasionally peer over my shoulder and Evelyn would phone me in the middle of the afternoon to check in or check up, depending on the context, ensured that my leash was kept short. Because of the frenetic nature of my work, I was able to prevent my thoughts from traveling to negative areas. Not only was Mr. Jacobs a rough old bird, but he was also fair. He added, in a voice that was crackly but compassionate, "You're holding up the fort, Emery," during one of our phone check-ins. "Keep it up." When I go back to that particular evening, the sun had just sunk beyond the horizon, painting the sky with a variety of colors of blue that were worn out. While sitting on the couch with the remote in his hand, Lucas flipped through the stations without actually tuning into anything. As I shut down my laptop, my mind was exhausted from the hours of working with figures and emails. It was a weekday type of tiredness in my voice when I told him, "Work is done for the time being." The grunt he made was not a yes or no sound. It was merely Lucas's way of saying, "I heard you." After joining him on the couch, I found myself sliding into the cushion, feeling as exhausted as my bones. He then said, "You've been talking to Jacobs a lot about work." This statement came out of nowhere. I answered, "Yes, it's work, Lucas," continuing to keep my eyes on the television since I did not want to start another argument. "Mum," he murmured, the sound of gears grinding in his thoughts being a sound that became familiar to him. Those are the circumstances of my existence with Lucas, where the blindfold that my love was wearing only became tighter, and every stride forward seemed like 2 steps back. Her eyes were filled with questions that I was afraid to answer, and the lady who was looking at me in the mirror began to appear to be an unknown person. I was in need of transportation one day, and because Grandma's house was too far away for me to walk, I decided to call a taxi. When the driver arrived at my location, he was simply an ordinary person going about his business. He dropped me off, and that ought to have been the end of it. On the other hand, it wasn't. It was Lucas who was waiting outside the cab, and the sight of me getting out of the vehicle was enough to set him off in a major way. As soon as the driver had just about finished handing me my change, Lucas was already on him. "What's going on here, huh?" When Lucas snapped, his eyes grew large. "Who's this?" "Let's take it easy, Lucas. Not much more than a cab driver." When I attempted to interrupt Lucas, he was not going to have it. When the driver noticed that there was a problem, he did not lose a single second before putting the vehicle into gear and driving away. A really astute individual. After we had entered the building, Lucas continued to be irate. While he was walking back and forth, he cast accusatory stares in my direction. Uninterested in the drama, I let out a sigh. "You mean that, Lucas? You're getting worked up about nothing at all. It's not a trivial matter. Who can say for sure what you were doing inside with you?" The sound of Lucas's voice reverberated powerfully through the confines of our doorway. I gave a sigh of relief. "Get over yourself." As a result of it, things began to calm down, although not for very long. I was in the middle of preparing supper when I noticed Lucas looking through my phone. This happened a couple of days later. "What's up? Why do you believe you're acting in this manner?" As I grabbed the phone from his grasp, I let out a loud yelp. His voice drifted off, giving the impression that he was a child who had had his hand caught in the cookie jar. "Do you mind telling me what's so interesting in my phone?" I was starting to become really weary of this. Lucas sidestepped my gaze and scratched the back of his neck. "I'm not sure. I suppose I was simply making sure you weren't hiding anything by keeping an eye on you." I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. "Are you attempting to reach me? Are you serious at this moment? You feel that's acceptable?" He remained silent for a while before saying, "I apologize. Is everything okay?" "I apologize. Won't occur once again." "You're right. This is absurd, and it won't happen again. You're behaving in an insane manner." I was becoming impatient. I apologized. "Look," I said, "I made a mistake. Please pardon me." Now that his tone had loosened, it appeared as though he meant it. I took a long breath out. Yes, I was furious, but not to the point of discarding everything. Not quite yet. "All right, Lucas, this is it. Put an end to your jealous child persona. You need to gather yourself." He gave a too enthusiastic nod. "Yes, without a doubt. I swear." That was where we ended things. I wanted to think that things would turn around. Even though I knew it was unlikely, I couldn't help but be optimistic. That must be the way things work sometimes. Despite seeing caution signals and red flags, you choose to ignore them in the hopes of finding an alternative route. It all began one clear morning when I observed an automobile. It was an unremarkable dark sedan that was suspiciously tidy and still. From my kitchen window, I could see it parked on the adjacent street. Not a huge deal, I reasoned. Most likely, it's merely a visit to someone. However, I noticed it once again in the parking lot of the grocery store, where it was just seated a few aisles away. And next to the dry cleaner once more. Car and location were similar, like a lost penny that kept popping up. After a week, I was unable to ignore it any longer. I had to find out. So I took a detour on my way home one day when the automobile followed me to the neighborhood library. The automobile was indeed still there, following my maneuvers, staying at a safe distance, but always there. The vehicle came to a stop a short distance behind me as I pulled onto a side street. This was no accident. It's strange how, despite something being right in front of you, your mind refuses to accept that it is wrong. It looked so ridiculous, like something from a cheap mystery drama, but there it was. My heart was pounding, and I was feeling angry and afraid at the same time. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police number. I said, as if the man behind me could hear. "I think I'm being followed." It was taken seriously by the police. They moved immediately to examine the man's ID and spoke with him in the car. They verified my suspicions in a matter of minutes. The man was, in fact, a private investigator, and he was indeed pursuing me. Accompanied me on my husband's credit. When I came home, I was trembling and holding the police report tightly. That's Lucas, contentedly oblivious to the fact that his little game was over as he lounged on the couch like it was any other evening. "Lucas," I cried out, opening the door more than I had meant to. "What the hell is this?" Startled, he leaped to his feet, his eyes flashing as always when he's on the back foot. "Emery, I'm a private detective, Lucas." My voice was trembling so much that I was having trouble speaking clearly. "You have me followed." His cheeks heated and smirk as he stammered out some apology. "Avoid." I stopped him and held out a hand, saying, "Just don't." I was not going to listen to whatever falsehood he could make up. "What do you know? I'm not capable of doing this." Even when my voice cracked, I managed to gather myself. "You need to leave, Lucas." He closed his mouth abruptly. It appeared as though he might argue, then he changed his mind. Without further word, he simply picked up his coat and walked out. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel afraid of being completely alone. It was the most sincere thing I had felt in a long time. It had been a strange start to the day. After telling Lucas to pack up his belongings and go, I was still getting used to a quieter house. Quiet wasn't one of the many things a man was. Though I must admit, it was also a little unsettling. The quiet was broken like a fallen dish when there came a knock at my door. Lucas's employer, Mr. Freeman, was there. He was of average height and constantly gave off the impression that he was starching both his face and his shirt. I've never really liked him, but he showed in today carrying a folder full of documents. "He's not here," I informed him prior to his entering. Mr. Freeman scowled, clearly unaccustomed to doors that did not open for him. "I have some crucial paperwork for him, work-related items." I exhaled. We would be living in a luxury if Lucas had a $1 for every time he made a difference. "Yes, he isn't present. When he gets back, may I give these to him?" Mr. Freeman nodded after giving it some thought. "I guess. Please allow me to briefly enter. I spent hours behind the wheel." I suppose his automobile was as elegant as his outfit, with its glossy black exterior. Indeed, I reasoned, why not? I gestured toward the kitchen and urged him inside. "Please have a seat. Do you want a cup of tea?" He collapsed like a bag of grain, exhausted from either life or the road. It was difficult to say. "Tea would be good, thank you, Emery." As per my professional routine, I switched on the kettle and added some leaves to the pot. I used to like being the kind host. It was at that moment that I noticed something through the kitchen window. Flames circling Mr. Freeman's automobile as though it were a celebration. I pushed Mr. Freeman's half-made tea in his direction. "Your car." After we hurried outdoors, my divorced husband Lucas was grinning as though someone had bought him a surprise cake on his birthday. Like flames, the madness in his eyes glinted. "My car," Mr. Freeman cried out. "What on earth is going on?" Lucas turned to face us, a flutter of a smile. "Hi, Emery. I'm taking my life, that's why. Say welcome to your beloved," he said, his voice slurred with a good measure of madness and joy. He believed he was exacting revenge on an imaginary romantic partner of mine. Mr. Freeman's expression went from bewilderment to rage as he stood still. "Lucas, did you do this?" When Lucas finally realized what was going on, his smile vanished from his face quicker than ice cream on a sweltering day. His supervisor, his spouse. His error. "Boss, I didn't know." Mr. Freeman interrupted him. "You thought my automobile belonged to someone, so you set it on fire." "Lucas, God, the paperwork for the contract renewal was with me. Now consider them ashes along with your employment. You're through." Quicker than a bag of those identical papers, Lucas went on his knees, groveling like a child whose hand got stuck in the cookie jar. "Please, Mr. Freeman, Mr. Freeman said, "Save it," in an icy tone. "I'm calling the police." It took the sirens no time at all. Neighbors, police, and a few others pointing phones at us like we were cheap entertainment for the evening packed the street like a clogged faucet. I felt like 100 weights lifted off me when the policeman put cuffs on Lucas's wrists. His knees still caked from the driveway. One fire out, the remainder to be cleaned up. Mr. Freeman simply shook his head while glancing at the former automobile. The last thing I saw of Lucas was him straining to peer over his shoulder at me, his terrified, bunny-eyed gaze. It seemed weird to walk into my living room. The ordeal with Lucas was nearing its conclusion. I informed him that the divorce papers were filed and asked him to leave. It was clear he didn't listen since he was now facing jail time for both following me and setting fire to his boss's car. Mr. Freeman, the boss, wasn't too fond of his automobile being grilled. After firing Lucas, he filed a lawsuit against him. I couldn't help but feel like a weight was lifted off my shoulders as I stood there. "Emery, honey." From the kitchen came Grandma June's summons. "You need anything?" Shaking my head, I entered to greet her. Grandma June had a knack of cutting right through bullshit. "Gran, I'm good, but I should have listened to you about Lucas." Turning around, she was at the sink using a dish towel to dry her hands. "Oh, honey, when will you learn to trust this gut?" She laughed and patted her tummy. I couldn't contain my laughter. She was very honest all the time. I concurred, saying can't argue with Grandma's gut. I flipped through a magazine while sitting on the couch after that, but I wasn't actually reading. It was noise alone. Once again, I felt more confident than I had in some months. This was the wise course of action. Of course, tomorrow would bring new challenges. Attorneys sorting through the mess left by Lucas, financial matters. But it was just me tonight. I took out my phone and sent a text to Mara, who has been my best friend for ages. "At last free. Would you like to interrupt my alone time?" It was not long before she responded in kind. "I'm headed that way. Delivering pizza." It was going to be a simple night for the remainder. Not a drama. Not you, Lucas. Just nice company, crappy TV shows, and pizza. At last, I could breathe, so I pushed my hair back and slipped into my coziest sweatpants. Even if it wasn't quite evident yet, the future seemed far better than the past I had. As I considered it, I grinned to myself. It was simple, had no conditions, and eliminated the need to trade carefully. Yes, this was the way it was going to be going forward, beginning with the new locks engaging now. I was quite okay with the fact that freedom tonight tasted a lot like pepperoni and cheese.